Here it is, guys, our very own Mark Pomery taking our brand new series, A New You. Here it is, week 2. Sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Well, hey there, Elevate friends and family. Great to have you with us today for the second online experience for 2023 and the second week in our series, A New You, which we launched last week. And really recognizing that everything new that we want in life begins with a new you. And so last week, I talked about optics, the idea that how we see the world significantly impacts how we experience the world. And so if we can actually see the world better, brighter, more clearly, more how God sees it, then we can actually start to experience that better in our life as well. So if you missed that, obviously you can go back and watch that on this channel, or if podcast is a better vehicle, then you can find us on all of the major podcast platforms. Just search Elevate Church Perth, and that message will be there. Today, I want to talk about a new standard. So, now, if you've got your smartphone handy, pop open the camera and scan this flow code. It's going to take you to Luke chapter 19. Now, Luke was a medical doctor. He was one of the 4 biographers of Jesus' life and ministry. He collected eyewitness accounts and packaged them up in his account. And I want to drop us into this, just a very short interaction that Jesus had. So this is what Luke records. Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. There was a man there named Zacchaeus. Now he was the chief tax collector in the region, and he'd become very rich. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. And so he ran ahead, climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came by, Jesus looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. Zacchaeus, he said, "Quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today." Well, Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. But the people were displeased. "He's gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner," they grumbled. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, "I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I've cheated people in their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much." And Jesus responded, "Salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost." Now, this is kind of just a short description of their interaction. It probably took place over the course of a day or an afternoon or an evening, but Luke doesn't really tell us that much about Zacchaeus, but there are a few important things that Luke does tell us about Zacchaeus. Firstly, he was short. Okay. Secondly, he, I guess, inadvertently describes Zacchaeus as being resourceful. Zacchaeus didn't sit back feeling sorry for himself because he couldn't get past the crowd. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame other people. He found a way. Resourceful people find a way. And then these two, and probably this is the most important thing that Luke describes about Zacchaeus, and that was that he was the chief tax collector. Now, Zacchaeus was living in the Jewish area. But he was working on behalf of the Romans to collect taxes for them. So there was a problem. You know, the people resented Roman occupation, resented having to send tax back to Rome from the money they earned in their homeland. So that was bad enough. So if you were a tax collector, there was a level of disdain for you. However, it didn't stop there. And that's because typically the tax collectors, and they were just a go-between Rome and the area they lived in, but the tax collectors, they took the liberty of adding an amount for themselves. So whatever the amount that you had to pay back in taxes to Rome, the tax collectors would add some and skim that off for themselves. And Rome typically turned a blind eye because as far as Rome was concerned, as long as they got their money, who cares what else? And so effectively, Zacchaeus and people in his occupation were gouging their very own people, aka stealing, aka oppressing people who had less. And so he would have been very despised. No surprise that, you know, Zacchaeus was so short he couldn't get past the people, and nobody was making an effort to let him through anyway. And then Luke he happens to also mention that Zacchaeus was very rich. And so you get the idea that Zacchaeus had been in this occupation for a while and he'd been gouging the people for a while to glean the money for his own purposes. Now, this isn't what I want to focus on today, but let me just make sure we don't miss this because this is a super important aspect and really showcases something about Jesus, and that was that Jesus looked up to somebody that everybody looked down on. And actually, fun fact, this interaction that Jesus had looking up to, elevating his vision, elevating his focus up to Zacchaeus, was actually one of the inspirations for us naming ourselves Elevate Church. So, there you go. But Jesus didn't just look up at him, he also acknowledged him, and only him, and then he invited himself to Zacchaeus' house. So there's two really important things to note about this. First of all, Jesus invited himself to Zacchaeus' house. He invited himself, but he didn't invade it. So that tells you something about Jesus' approach to Zacchaeus, to us. He puts the invitation out, but then there's the second part that Zacchaeus could have said no. No, thank you, Jesus. No. And really, our answer to whether we would respond with a yes to Jesus inviting himself into our house, into our life, hinges on just what it is we think he might want to do when he gets in there. And if you think that he's going to do some damage, then sure, you wouldn't let him in. But if you think he's going to actually make some positive changes, some improvements, then why wouldn't we give him an access all areas pass, which is exactly what Zacchaeus did. But here's the problem. You know, too many people don't mind visiting Jesus, but they don't want Jesus to visit them. You know, I'll keep him at a safe distance. I'll keep him at arm's reach. I want to know that he's nearby. I'll meet him in the temple. I'll meet him in the street, but I'm not going to let him into my life. But when you realize that Jesus' motivation is to lead us to a new and better standard, then you're just shooting yourself in the foot if you don't give him an access all areas pass. Now, here's an occupational hazard that I will divulge right now. Occasionally, not often, but occasionally, I'll have somebody approach me and ask me if I would tell this other person, someone in their life, in their sphere, to stop doing something because what they're doing is wrong. Like, Mark, can you tell them to stop doing that because it's wrong? I've told them, they won't listen, so can you tell them? And I'm like, I always give people the exact same answer. It goes like this. Firstly, I'm not the morality police, okay? That's not my job. In fact, my job is to lead people to follow Jesus more closely and more effectively. And I trust that Jesus is just as effective in the transformation business today as he was when he walked the earth in human form. And so my job's not to transform people. My job's to lead people to Jesus, help them follow him more effectively, and let him do the transforming. And that as someone chooses to, and by the way, they have to choose to, you can't make them. Someone chooses to submit themselves to Jesus, that they will start to experience a new standard that will lead them to the sort of life that Jesus had for them all along. And this is precisely what happened to Zacchaeus. He got in the presence of Jesus. He let Jesus into his home, and he made sweeping changes, monumental decisions, because simply of the presence of Jesus. He committed to giving half of his wealth to the poor and to repaying the people he'd been ripping off 4 times the amount that he'd taken from them. And here's the bonkers thing. Jesus didn't even ask him to do it. Jesus didn't command him to do it. It wasn't even Jesus' idea. It wasn't like Jesus said, okay, in order to become a follower of mine, Zacchaeus invited Jesus into his home, and he had his own revelation that there was a new and better standard available to him. Now, I've said this before, but it bears repeating. I have the conviction that to simply talk about sin in the context or the framework of right versus wrong is both overly simplistic, and I don't think it's actually very helpful. In fact, we don't talk about it that way. We have adopted the language that sin is thinking, saying, doing something that's less than God's best, that it's something that we're doing and at a lower standard. And we then try to highlight that God's standard is both higher, and better. Like, why wouldn't you want to go to a new standard? See, Zacchaeus was living selfishly, wrong, ripping his own people off. It was wrong, but it was also less than God's best, and he recognized that, and so he committed to a new and better standard. He was being driven by greed. And again, he recognized that God has a new, a higher, a better standard, and he committed to that new standard. He committed to it. He did the stuff. He took the tangible steps. He did what it took for him in his situation to go to a new standard. See, there's some things you can't pray into existence. You can only act them into existence. I know, it sounds blasphemous, but I'm going to say it again. There are some things you can't pray into existence. You can only act them into existence. If you want to improve your health, Jesus is not going to become your Uber driver and your personal trainer. He's not going to rock up to your house, knock on the door, ring the doorbell, drag you to the gym, and put you through your paces. You have to do that. If you want to get out of debt, God's not going to take over as the signatory and the money manager and just dole things out and make decisions on your behalf. If you want to become more generous, God's not going to visit your internet banking and set up the direct debit. You've got to do that. If you want to improve your marriage, God's not going to set up a chair in your living room and scream out instructions like a basketball coach on the sideline. Now, prayer is vital as we act things into existence, praying for strength, praying for courage, praying for direction, but the actual action has to come from us. God can't make us do it, and He won't necessarily, and in most cases, do it for us. Now, you and I will never create a new standard. We'll never elevate our lives to a new standard if we're driven by the question, what's the least I can get away with? Which literally looks like this. What's the least I can get away with in my blank to avoid blank? What's the least I can get away with in my job to avoid getting fired? What's the least I can get away with in my marriage to avoid getting divorced? What's the least I can get away with in my health to avoid getting sick? What's the least I can get away with in my finances to avoid getting evicted? What's the least I can get away with in my church to avoid upsetting God? But this is a low altitude question that will ensure you live at a low altitude. And the antidote to this is to ask the question, what does it look like to exceed expectations, to do more than expected? And asking that question, it's like a cheat code that unlocks a whole nother level of living for you. In fact, what that does is it actually elevates your baseline. What is doing more than expected? What is exceeding expectations? What does that look like? That actually elevates your baseline, which invariably simultaneously elevates your ceiling, and you will start to live with a higher capacity at the new and higher and better standard. Exactly what Zacchaeus did. And because he did more than what might have been expected. I mean, he offered to repay people 4 times the amount. Just giving them a simple refund should have been enough. But he went to a new and higher and better standard. And that's why we're reading about him. That's why Luke bothered to include him. Now, we need to understand this about progress, about moving to a new standard, a higher standard. Sometimes it's monumental. Like we just kind of get catapulted up because of something. And hey, great, I'll take them any day. However, most progress is incremental, not monumental. And the key is to break big dreams down into small goals. I remember when I wrote my first book, or committed to writing my first book, the word count goal was 30,000 words, which before I started writing, that sounded like a heck of a lot of words. It could have felt a bit overwhelming, but look, all I did was I committed to arriving at my office 30 minutes earlier than normal, and I would just write for 30 minutes every single day. Just write as many words as I could write in 30 minutes. I then close it up and get onto my paid job. And guess what? I eventually reached 30,000 words, but I didn't do a writing marathon. No, I broke down the big goal, 30,000 words, into small goals and executed them. So if in 2023 you want to experience a new standard in your health, don't commit to trying to qualify for the Paris 2024 Olympics. Just like set a goal of 3 to 4 activities per week. If you have a goal to want to lose weight in 2023, don't take the nuclear option and obliterate all suboptimal foods from your diet, because it's the only thing you're going to lose is your joy. Instead, pick one thing. I'm going to eliminate processed carbohydrates. I'm going to eliminate added sugars. And get good at that. Build some confidence with that. Build a track record with that, and then take that discipline and that confidence and then take a next step and apply that and apply that and apply. And you will see incrementally things start to snowball to a new, higher, better standard. So let me finish with some homework. Here's 2 questions. Well, they're sort of like A-B questions, framed around next steps from here. What's an area you know you need to set a new standard in? And B, what's the first thing you need to do towards achieving that? Okay, I'll leave you with that.